Okay, so thank you very much for coming to join us this exciting webinar titled Recent Trends in Ocean Knowledge and Governance Capacity. This is really sort of like a started a few years ago when we needed to address the change and the shift of ocean governance capacity. Basically, the resources and personnels and initiatives that has been holding ocean governance, which make any of the project interventions accountable and responsible and legitimate, is how is it changing in the world? So that includes the people working in the government, that includes people teach at the universities, that includes people learning the ocean knowledge and the governance, and also other peoples who are practitioners who are constantly sort of like asking for accountability and where they could go, is there any institution? So those capacities are extremely important for us, but we see there has been a shift in various places. So I asked Dr. Anna Zivian to first focus on US to work on this trend analysis. Dr. Anna Zivian is a very good friend of mine, and she's a researcher and a policy expert with really over 30 years. I think Anna and I met about almost 15 years ago. Anna has been working as a senior research fellow at Ocean Conservancy, and before that, now she's associated with Ocean Nexus. Thanks for that. Before that, she was elected official in Colorado for 10 years. And she earned her PhD in environmental studies from University of California, Santa Cruz, and her undergraduate studies were Russian and Soviet studies at Harvard University. Anna speaks German, French, and Italian, and major in Spanish and studying Arabic. And I suppose you do, and you speak Russian as well, didn't you?
My Russian is terrible right now because I haven't spoken for so long, but I can get by in it, and yeah, I can understand Spanish very well, but don't speak it. When I try to speak, it comes out in Italian.
Okay, I wouldn't be able to know the difference. But I'm so sorry. My name is Yoshitaka. I'm a director of Nippon Foundation Ocean Nexus, and this webinar is supported by the Nippon Foundation funding. So thanks for that. And I'm also a professor. I actually am a professor at University of Rhode Island. University of Rhode Island sits in the land of Narragansett people in New England. So we love to acknowledge that since we're working with the tribes over here. So anyway, I would like to start this seminar and webinar. First, Anna to present her recent work on which we commissioned on ocean governance capacity in the United States. And then we're going to have a discussion, and we open for the Q&A. If you have any questions for Anna or me, you could actually put it in either chat or this Q&A, which you could see underneath of your Zoom. Anything randomly you like to ask, you can just send me an email or Ocean Nexus email address that Karin will put it later in the chat. Okay, so and it's been so exciting working with you, and I'd love to hear what you found. May not be a joyful result, but yet it's very important for us to know what's going on. So, Dr. Zivian, please take it away.
Thank you so much. And I see Karen just put the interim report in the link in the chat. That's great. Really feel free to put any questions in the chat as we go along. This doesn't have to be terribly formal, so I'm happy to respond in the middle. And I just, first of all, thank you. Second, I am speaking from the unceded territory of the Awaswas speaking Yupi tribe in California. And I just again wanted to thank Yoshi also for, as you can see, I'm a little bit out of commission, and so he kindly put together some slides that we talked about, which I will share in a little bit. But first, I just wanted to echo some of the points about ocean knowledge and governance capacity and why it's so important right now. Obviously, we're facing, four interconnected crises at the moment of climate change, of biodiversity decline, of pollution, and of loss of equity and justice. And I think in a time where we're facing these crises, increased capacity in both knowledge and governance and societal connection is incredibly important. And so that is why we want to look at this not just in the US, but on a global level. We've started in the US because some of the trends are very dramatic here right now. And but some of those trends are reflected elsewhere. We're also looking at some things that are happening in New Zealand and Ecuador. In some places, there is also increased capacity, which so there are some glimmers of hope. But as Yosh said, we're starting with the United States because it's the access for us is good. It's a very important player in global ocean science and knowledge. And as I said, the trends are very unique and dramatic at the moment. So I will share some of the slides just to go through some highlights of what's happening. Then I'll talk about what that means and what I've been hearing from some of the interviews I've been doing. I've talked to about 20 people so far from both federal government, state government, and NGOs, as well as people who work internationally. And so I'll talk about what some of the things that have come out of those interviews are. So I will share my screen for a few moments. Um, and I think that is the slides. So as we heard, recent trends in ocean knowledge and governance capacity. And in the US, as I said, there have been some dramatic staff reductions at the federal level and financial resource reductions. Now, I will note these are preliminary numbers. The official government numbers from the Office of Management, from OMB, Office of Management and uh, I forget what it is. It's terrible when you know the acronym but not the agency. But the official government employment numbers are only from March, which means that they don't take into account the changes that happened in February and from then on. But from OMB numbers, reports and assessments of what has happened, and from the government statements of what is planned, at least 135,000 with up to 300,000 federal employees out of 2.3 million. So a very large percentage have been cut. From NOAA, it's at least 2,300. USAID has essentially been ended. Interior has lost over 10,000. EPA has lost over 11,000. Energy, NASA have also lost a substantial number of employees. Now, I put the employees who are most closely related to issues that we're working on in ocean and climate. Um, the so those are large numbers, for NOAA out of about it's out of about 12,000 employees. So that's a sixth of the workforce that is gone. And just so that you know, these staff reductions have happened through firings of probationary employees. Now, probationary employees doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't mean they were on probation for a cause. It means they were on probation because they were new employees, that is, hired in the last 1 or 2 years, or they recently changed positions. For example, got promoted or got a raise. So they were promoted to a position because of excellent performance, and yet they were probationary, so they were fired. Different agencies did this differently, but NOAA fired all their probationary employees. Some of those, as I found from my interviews, included people who had been recruited for years to join NOAA because of their high performance outside of NOAA and because of the work they had done in partnership with NOAA. So there were the probationary employees. Then there were the quote voluntary retirements. I would note there that those retirements were voluntary only insofar as employees were told they might lose benefits if they retired later rather than at that time. So a lot of people took the opportunity to retire with their benefits. And deferred resignations, which were people who said, yes, I will take that retirement, worked till, say, October 1st, and then left their agency. So there are a number of different ways people that staff was cut, but again, these were unusually large numbers, and these offers of deferred resignation and voluntary retirement are not common. And the firing of probationary employees en masse is also not common. So these were things for which agency employees were not prepared. And we can talk about why that's important later. The financial resources side is a little bit misleading because only in that this is the administration's budget. These are the proposals that came from the president. These are not the numbers that are necessarily going to be in the congressional budget once that gets approved. Right now, everything is very much up in the air. We're in a shutdown, as you all know. The government is not operating. The budget has not yet been approved. It was supposed to be approved by September 30th. There has been no continuing resolution, which is how, in past years, if you don't get an agreement to the budget, there have been, 1 or 2 year continuing resolutions that allow the government to keep functioning at a steady budget. However, these are indicative of the goals of the federal government at the moment of potentially cutting these amounts. So as you can see, they range from, just over 20% to USAID, which has essentially been completely defunded. Again, this is important because it shows what the trends are in terms of the goals for capacity, whether the goals are to increase capacity or decrease capacity. And these numbers indicate a decrease in capacity. Some of the functions could potentially be shifted, and we can talk about that more later, but there are a number of the functions that would be decreased that simply, can't be shifted, including operating government facilities, operating government, floats like Argo floats, etc. So you can see these are some pretty dramatic changes. They include, as I noted, complete or near complete terminations of such as USAID, which is the United States Agency for International Development. They also include, and there is a particular emphasis in the cuts, in scientific research and as well as in environmental justice. So in EPA, both the Office of Research and Development and the Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights are slated to be terminated. The Department of Defense Social Science Research Unit also terminated. The Department of Justice Environmental Justice Unit, the State Department of Global Change, so climate change, and even the NOAA Office of Ocean and Atmospheric Research is proposed to be cut. Again, the NOAA OAR cut is not in the current congressional budget, but it is proposed. And I'm just looking because I saw a question popped up. No. Okay. Thank you, Anushka, for that comment. I really appreciate more, some more evidence about this. So I think it's important that we hear from staff to see what these changes mean. Sorry, I did not mean to pop the chat up on there. So they have also defunded areas of issue areas and topic areas rather than offices, and I would note given up a substantial amount of leased space and owned space, and that's important to think about when we think about if we staff back up. It's always difficult to find office space. I'm sure all of you have seen that, and so getting rid of substantial, of I think it's 119 government leases means that should that space be needed again in the future, it will have to be, they will have to find it. So physical space, but also these areas where programs have been defunded. Disaster preparedness, for example, the EPA disaster preparedness grants that were in the IRA from the Biden administration, the Inflation Reduction Act, that helped communities prepare for disasters. Climate research, one of the most notable changes is that the U.S. Global Change Research Program staff has been eliminated, and the researchers who were working with that staff from academic institutions are no longer, working on that program. The website climate.gov, which is congressionally mandated, has been taken down. And here's one example of something that has been taken over but can't be maintained as effectively. A group of private individuals who worked on climate.gov have put up a website, climate.us, that does have the 5th National Climate Change Assessment hosted on it. Also, the EPA greenhouse gas reporting programs, where companies report their Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, is no longer reporting. In international cooperation, USAID funding eliminated. The State Department is not sending climate negotiation staff to international meetings. In fact, international travel and most travel has been cut dramatically. For public health concerns, water quality monitoring programs have been cut. On coastal adaptation, some of the international aid programs focused on coastal adaptation have been cut, and some of the coastal research collaboratives have been unfunded. For long-term data sets, and this is something that's come out in our discussions and I think was also brought up by Ben Brunges in the last Ocean Nexus webinar, which I encourage anyone who didn't see to go back and look at on the Ocean Nexus site. The long-term data is at risk because funding for the long-term ecological research sites that have been collecting data for decades is at risk. NASA satellite data is no longer being shared openly, which is important for Antarctic research, for example. Plankton, color monitoring, satellite data is no longer uh, being monitored by the U.S., by NASA. And environmental justice is a key area where things have been eliminated and defunded. For example, the termination of the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. A number of advisory councils that work on science, that work on justice, have also been eliminated. Climate change awareness. I talked about climate.gov. Also, the climate literacy guide was removed from the NOAA website, as one of Yoshi's students discovered when looking into this. Climate education, just an example, the Chesapeake Bay education program has been cut. Fisheries management staff reductions have meant that it's harder to get fisheries data. I spoke with a state agency scientist who said that they were no longer able to call species experts up because those species experts are now gone. So some of these personal knowledge holdings are also gone when the people leave. Um, International leadership with the lack of travel with the State Department cuts. Science and knowledge capacity, NSF has seen large staff cuts and funding cuts. Research, development, and innovation, one of the key points there is lack of time to innovate and lack of capacity. People are performing, for example, the function of their current function and then the function that they used to hold, or their superior's function, and they don't have time to innovate. In addition, there have been funding cuts across science programs that provided the opportunity to innovate. For example, one of the most prestigious federal fellowships for postdocs has the Global Change Research postdoc has been does, for the first time since its inception, has no incoming fellows. And that means that that kind of fellowship allowed postdocs to work on their projects, on things that it gave them a lot of freedom to explore. They no longer, now maybe they still can find a position, but they're going to have to work on what their supervisor has funding for, which means that it's harder to bring new ideas into the process. And public things as simple as public access to information, not just websites being removed, but actual signage being removed because of concerns about misrepresentation of U.S. history. So some of the facts about, parks being on indigenous lands have been removed from signage. So that's a lot of stuff. I have more detail for folks who are interested, and you can look at some of that in the report, and we'll be updating that report as well for December. But some of the big concerns that have arisen in the interviews, and these are not just for the US, these are global concerns, are this concern that Ben brought up about the discontinuation of open data programs, the discontinuation of data sets and data sharing. Where are these data going to be kept? Where are they going to be created? What does it mean if you have these gaps in a time of rapid change? One of the, yes, there is some potential for other countries to pick up some of the monitoring and observations, but there is a large global reliance on US data sets like the Argo floats, like some of these NASA satellites. And some of the countries that have increased their observations are either doing increasing local observations, which are incredibly important. And that's a wonderful and sort of heartening thing. For example, Cabo Verde has increased its monitoring as part of its all Atlantic, Belém work with countries across the Atlantic. And some of the countries that have increased their monitoring, like China, are less open to sharing that information internationally. So there's a decline in data access just at a time when we need more. A key thing that's come out in, I would say, every interview is the erosion of trust. The US has not always been a great player internationally. In any case, it has a reputation sometimes for bullying, for being overbearing, but it is an important player and has also been a good partner in a number of international agreements, International Whaling Commission, UNFCCC, all of these international agreements where partners and partnership is important. So at the international level, there is a lack of trust when you don't see people, they also stop thinking about you. So not going to these international events is a concern. And at the local level, the work with communities. It takes a long time to build up trust working with communities. And when you suddenly take away funding that they've been promised, or simply stop supporting them when they had an expectation of that, it's hard to rebuild that trust. The staff at the agencies, the problem is not simply, and Anushka can probably talk about this as well, is not simply that you're losing staff and you don't have time to innovate or reach out to partners. It's also that there's so much uncertainty right now. Again, under the shutdown, there have been additional staff fired. Um, and people have low morale and are concerned about what might happen next. And that is not a positive working environment. And as I said, it also reduces what kind of innovation can happen because you're just keeping things running and you don't have time to innovate. And the fact that funding to academia has at the same time been cut, and funding for postdoctoral programs has been cut. This makes it very hard for academia to pick up some of the areas of research that might be lost. And it also makes it difficult for innovation to happen at academia. Private industry can't necessarily pick that up because their focus, I mean, this is what they're there for, is on profit. And so they will not necessarily maintain data that isn't profitable for them to maintain or work with communities where they don't see a benefit. And the global repercussions are, as I've mentioned, these cuts to education, research, and data exchange undermine international collaboration. So that is the the end of the slides. I would love to have some questions from all of you, from Yoshi, from the rest of you. I'd love to hear a bit from some of the folks in the audience who have been putting really interesting information in the chat. And Yosh, I'll let you take the floor, but we can look at a couple of those questions too.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Anna. That was a great summary, and you got into some of the details. which was quite astonishing. So I'm just going to kick off with the discussion. We're just going to have a discussion on, wait for the people to just put more questions to it. You look at this huge impact of the shift, which happened in a very short time. It's probably amount of the time of 3-4 months or even shorter than that. And obviously we will experience it as many of us are working for the ocean governance. Do you know, like, as much as the shift, and elimination that we could see it, do you also see if there has been any of the shift of the functions which saved some of the data and knowledge and functions, or the things happening in such a short time, there has been really given enough time for any of those people to preserve what they have accumulated in terms of knowledge, trust, roles, and the functions. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Yoshi, and I'm glad you brought it up. One of the concerns here is it's not the best term, but knowledge management, right? Knowledge transfer, uh, preparation, keeping knowledge, holding knowledge. How do you do that? And you really put your finger on it because this happened so quickly. And some of these voluntary, retirement folks, at NOAA, over 27,000 years of experience have been lost um, through these people who took the deferred resignation, or the VERA or the VISP, which are the acronyms for the voluntary retirement programs. And normally when people retire, they have a transition period that they're prepared for a couple of years even, where they're sharing their processes, the people they know, their contacts. So it's not just a loss of, data, hard knowledge, things that are in reports that can be recreated. It's it's the knowledge that people hold that really takes some time to transfer to, the people who are coming in to replace them. Now, we didn't have that time, and we also don't necessarily have the people replacing them. One of the interviewees talked about kind of a hollowing out, because the recently promoted and the go-getters who are coming in are gone, and the people who held the most institutional knowledge are also gone, and there wasn't time for an effective transfer. So that is a big concern. There are efforts to save some of that. Um, as I noted, a very important one is at climate.gov. There is now climate.us that holds some of that information. There are individuals making efforts to find a way to maintain processes and knowledge. For example, nextinterior.org is for people who were employees at the Department of Interior.
We could go there with another question. Maybe I just wanted to give you sort of like a separate question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So, so this is what has been shifted. Sudden change, well, the massive change in such a short time, and really the structure is designed, not designed intentionally, but potentially it was, but the as a consequence, it just really created a huge hole right in the middle of what we have accumulated over the last 30 years. The people are go-getters, was just really active, connecting, government agency to outside, collaborative governance and all, has been promoted, and then therefore, and abbreviation, therefore, they're on the target. And the people who's been near retirement, who has massive knowledge, has lost the chance to really pass those knowledge and trust and connection to any of the successors or any institute. So this is a huge loss for the government agency and potentially academic. But now, if you're going to speak the impact of this to the people who are not really working in the oceans, who are not really concerned about oceans in their daily lives, what would you say the impact could potentially be?
Well, first I'll say this cuts across agencies. We are focused on oceans because we're interested in ocean and coasts, but it's not limited to the ocean. However, for people who are like, okay, these NOAA employees are gone, so what? Some of the so whats are, as I noted, for example, disaster preparedness.
Mm,
What's happening at the weather service? Are there going to
mm,
be enough people both to make the weather observations and to report them? Um, Flood preparedness, water quality monitoring, so disease, right? For example, shellfish borne diseases, will those be picked up as quickly? So there are a lot of impacts from these agencies that seem perhaps removed that actually affect us on a day-to-day basis. We need to be prepared for unusual weather events, storm events. This creates less preparedness. We need to know, is it safe to go swimming on this beach? If there's less monitoring, we don't have that information. Um, Also, communities that are trying to build their resilience don't have the partners who are helping provide information about, you know, it's things as simple as mapping, right? Which I think Tony put in a question about you know ocean mapping, but also coastal mapping. That those communities that have relied on NOAA for some of these coastal inundation and flooding maps, and also have relied on NOAA personnel for help figuring out how to create green infrastructure for restoration projects, funding there is cut. So it puts vulnerable communities even more at risk.
can I just be like really devil's advocate and then say, okay, now government shrunk, it got small. Like, why don't we transfer those functions to the privates? We
And
could.
and that's why I was getting at that earlier and saying the private sector, some functions the private sector can do, but other functions they don't have an incentive to do.
Mm,
Um, there are reasons why certain functions are best done by the government. That is a big one.
mm,
If you think about public transportation, right,
mm,
that's something that really functions better as a public function. Similarly, collecting data on floodplain mapping or species of concern. That's unless it's a commercial species, there
mm,
isn't a private uh, industry or business that has the kind of incentive or funding to to map and track habitat for species that don't automatically affect them, that have no commercial value. Delta smelt,
mm. I
uh,
mean, clearly, there's no business mechanism which makes it those profitable unless those people who are vulnerable can afford or forced to pay certain amount of the money or the benefit to the people who are actually doing it, right? So it became a service of the private, which makes seeking for the profitability, which really actually marginalize even those people further. Um,
precisely. It
right,
creates a bigger gap
right.
between those who can afford to pay for the service and those who can't. And as I said, there are a lot of services that you don't think about that are actually really important, that don't
Mm,
have an immediate impact. That's the other thing, that private funding, one of the things that came out of the interviews is long-term planning and
mm,
long-term monitoring is
mm,
something that is really at risk here because there's much less visibility and
mm,
much less incentive for a private business do that long-term work.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is really devastating, but it's even more devastating for the people like us who actually teaches at university. You talked a little bit about innovations, opportunities for postdoc and student. They're really just carrying out the next generation. You've talked about like a loss of opportunities, and loss of a potential pathway to the innovations. Can you actually elaborate a little bit more about that, really?
Yeah, I mean, one of the, that postdoc that I mentioned, the Global
Mm,
Change Fellows,
mm,
um, that postdoc, a lot of the, premier climate scientists who are at academic institutions or in government have gone through that. It's a small fellowship, right? It's
mm,
a cohort of about 10, 8 to 10 a year, but it's had outsized impact. And part of the reason for that is that those fellows have had the opportunity to do whatever the hell they want for the
mm,
2 years of the fellowship. They don't
mm,
have to say to their institution or their director, oh, what do you want me to work on? They get to say, I found this really interesting question about surface ocean, lower atmosphere, wave, carbon transfer in sea spray in this particular area, and I want to study it. They have the freedom to do that. Without, the people who have the freedom, that's a very obvious example, and it's, like I said, small, but it's replicated in different places. And without the freedom to do that, there's less ability to come up with new ideas and to have the funding to pursue those new ideas. If I came in now as your grad student, right, you have funding for your projects. I couldn't say, Yoshi, I want to do a project on um reconnect, whatever. I couldn't come in and say, I want to work in Colorado on understanding how people think about the ocean in Colorado and what effect that has on equity in Colorado, right? Because you'd say, well, we don't have funding for that.
mm,
And
mm,
so with that, who knows what I would come up with or what that student would come up with, but that innovation, that avenue for innovating is
mm,
no longer there. That doesn't mean innovation won't happen. But
mm,
again,
mm.
that avenue is gone. Again, private sector innovation is geared towards more immediate profit. And then things like deep sea exploration, you just can't do that without partnerships, without collaboration. It's big, it's expensive, and it really works well when you have government partners and government materials. And there's innovations that come from understanding processes in the deep sea, just as
And
an
it,
example.
it comes to the point which innovation becomes innovation is shaped by certain interest. I mean, which
It,
it shouldn't really be called as innovations in my mind.
I
The
mean,
the so
it's true. It all, you can't separate science from society. We all know that, right? So there's always what research happens, what questions get asked are shaped by who we are
mm,
and are shaped by the funding that's there. That's always true, but it becomes more true when everything is condensed, compressed, and decreased.
absolutely.
So, innovation, lots of ocean science in the US came because of military concerns in World War II. So I think I
Yeah,
have sitting in my sundoku, in my pile of books, Naomi Oreski's book on US ocean research that talks about the history of ocean research. So innovation can come from unexpected places, but when there's less funding, when there are fewer people, when there are fewer opportunities, obviously it's a big
we
concern.
lose critical voices. So, Anna, you interviewed quite a few people, and it's just so devastating. Can you actually tell us like what their perception, what their spirit, or are they actually making an effort to, do something about it? If there is anything that you could share with us from your interviews and in talking to the people.
So, yes, it is devastating. People are stressed, they're upset, they feel um both, disappointed. People go into civil service and the ocean field broadly because they're passionate. They haven't lost that passion. That's the positive thing. People are looking for ways to stay involved. As I mentioned, there are initiatives, to get together to maintain that knowledge. People are looking for, I know that there are, WhatsApp groups where people are talking about how can we rebuild, how can we maintain this knowledge. I talked to some people who have worked on some initiatives in the past to rebuild knowledge and are prepared to do that again. Um, so I mean, I think Anushka could probably speak to this very well, having been in at NOAA, what the perceptions are there. But from the people I've talked to in the federal agencies, but also state, it's a stressful period. Um, and if I know we're
You told me the like, okay, so people still willing to continue, and then they're trying to find something or they organize something to continue their work. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I mean, for example, what's happening with that next interior, that's a public facing
Mm,
place where somebody who was a former Department of Interior employee is trying to both track provide what's happening, provide resources for former federal employees, and talk about how do we rebuild, maintain the knowledge, and then rebuild it if an opportunity arises.
mm,
I have talked to former NOAA employees, as I noted, who have, a WhatsApp group who are talking about, are there ways that we might be able to, maintain these are that particular group is with retirees,
mm,
people who took the VISP program. Um, are there ways that we can transfer the knowledge we have? I
mm,
think the opportunity is ripe to create a, potentially a working group, that could talk about what do we want ocean governance, ocean knowledge to look like in, you know, 2050. How do we, this is where we are, these are the trends, we're tracking that, but how do we get where we want to be? NOAA wasn't perfect. This was not the way to fix NOAA, but how do we create a better ocean governance structure when we have the opportunity in the future? And
thank you.
yeah.
Anna, so let's address those questions. Thank you very much, Tony. And thank you very much, Tony, also putting your symposium in the Monmouth Urban Coast Institute. If everybody interested in, please go and have a look. So here's a question, Anna, you have read it. Can you answer to that? And if anybody is looking for the question, that's in a webinar chat from Tony McDonald. So Anna, what do you think? What
Yeah,
can be
and hi
built more
Tony.
for
I
the
can't see
program?
you, but it's I'm so glad that you're here and are also working on this question. Um, as I said, in that first slide where it showed the administration's proposed budget, those aren't the numbers in the congressionally not yet approved, but in the congressional budget. Much of the funding in the congressional budget for NOAA has been maintained, so there is a recognition that the mapping, that the observations are important to maintain. again, there's the issue of, is there enough staff to do that? One of the issues that people brought up as a problem in federal government is how long the hiring process takes. So even if there's a recognition that those things need to get done and that there's funding to do them, now you've cut staff. And in order to do those functions, you probably need at least some of those staff back. It's going to take a couple years to hire them back. And so what happens in the interim? Um, and, we'll see. And this, on the good side, I guess, this is sort of, and somebody brought this up in an interview, you know, this is a chance to see, are there certain things that continue to function okay? Maybe we had too much priority in certain areas and not enough in others. And maybe those are things that we can, fix as we move forward, that we can improve as we move forward. This is not the way you'd ideally do that, but maybe there are lessons we can learn from this.
I think
And
that's really connected to Gerald's question. What is a rehiring strategy? What's a new impact? I don't know much about the rehiring right now. I don't. Do we know anything about the rehiring?
no, I mean, for example, weather service employees were fired en masse because a lot of these firings, I think, were sort of AI firings. That is,
Mm,
they were just, oh, this program can go, this is a program that deals with this issue that isn't a priority, so it can go. And then afterwards they realized, oh wait, we need those functions. And so those
mm,
rehirings were faster because
mm,
they were already there. But if we move forward and find we need somebody to fill, an ocean acidification position that is now gone, that kind of hiring will take a longer time period.
I mean, one of the things which, this is what I think Gerald also means. When we're going to rebuild or rehiring, pie is going to be much smaller, right? So it will be very difficult for us to restart what has started recently. For example, our effort on equity and diversity, that's very recent.
Mm.
That's the some people might argue, before we addressing those, why don't we address much more important things, much more fundamental things, which it's potentially, I don't mean that, but like a mapping or data connections and all that. I think it's very important discussion that we need to have here. Did you have any those conversations with your interviewees?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the people I interviewed actually feel that those equity and justice things have been initiatives were overdue and were
Hmm.
in fact priorities and
Hmm.
were vital new programs.
Hmm.
And because they had been ignored for so long, and so
Hmm.
were fundamental research priorities. Now that's not all of them. Some people are like, we really need to have these observations, and that's the number one priority.
Hmm.
I think that's part of why it would be useful to get together a group of
Hmm.
people, to kind of to hash some of that out.
Not to create the rapture, right? Not to create like small pie grabbing things among all our people who, yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
Mm,
And in a more cross-cutting way too, so that
mm,
it's
mm,
not, oh, well, my line office always did this, and so my line office needs to pick that back up. It could be maybe that's something that NASA should do, or maybe
mm,
something NASA does is something NOAA should do, right? To take sort of a very systematic look at
mm.
what is not happening and what are the priorities in what is not happening. And individuals by themselves may have ideas, but this is the kind of thing that is useful to do, like at Tony's symposium, where we have people coming together to discuss priorities. And I'd
I
love to
mean,
hear, well,
potential use of the AI, but then again, AI has some of the concerns which our
AI
voice in
replicates
particular.
I
Yeah.
mean, AI replicates historical
Mm-hmm.
things. So if you're saying we didn't have enough focus on a new or
Mm,
innovative thing
mm.
or, on environmental justice, it's not going to prioritize that because it's going to go back and look at what is most of the ocean and coastal
Yeah,
data
I mean,
about.
if I can advertise, our Ocean Nexus channel has a webinar with Matt Ziegler and Richard, who from computer science department in University of Washington, talk about AI's application in oceans and in the risk. So have a look at it. We're almost time. Anna, thank you so much. This has been so informative and if there's anything you like to say, at the end, the last 2 minutes, it's yours.
Well, first of all, if there is anybody on this webinar who would be willing to speak with me about their experiences with ocean governance and capacity trends for this project, either in the US or in the global context, I would love to hear from you. I will do my best to type my
It's okay. They'll find you.
I'll just put it in the chat.
Right.
I would love to talk to you. So please, reach out to me. And the other thing is like I think we all need to think about ways to both rebuild and, to borrow a phrase, build back better from this, both in the US and globally, to make sure that we have that we are addressing these existential crises facing us with the best knowledge.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zivian. Really appreciate working with you. And thank you very much for everyone who came here. Next webinar is going to be on, I think it's a communication and a journalism, which would be very interesting. So thanks a lot. Everybody take care. And Anna, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. And thanks everyone for attending. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.